Okay, I've just hit the live button, so we should be streaming here nice and live. And just giving it a second to catch up, and then hopefully you can all hear me, which is always the thing. I seem to always manage to mute the microphone or something so that it makes it hard for you guys to hear, or bury the microphone under a bunch of stuff. Welcome everyone. I see people checking in from all over the country, all over the world. Friends here in Canada, Whitehorse, Yukon, which is actually north of me, and you thought I lived in a frozen wasteland. We have Dolores is basically a neighbor. She lives in Edmonton, Alberta, which is where I go when I need to do a big shopping trip. And then I see friends from the United States, from Texas, South Carolina, Maryland, Maine, which I hear is getting lots of snow right now, Ohio, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and then we see people from outside of North America, Uruguay. I think welcome to Uruguay. I think that's the first time I've seen Uruguay on my feed here. So welcome, and Norway. Let's see, Belgium. Viviane, welcome. And yeah, I'm missing people. I see Invisibles is here from Oxford, the United Kingdom. Just welcome to everyone who's able to come. I'm going to just switch my camera over. You can hear me, and now you should be able to also see me. I also want to just say thank you to Joe Maskey, who has volunteered to moderate our chat today. That means he's just going to keep an eye on your questions. If you're having technical issues, or if I end up having technical issues, he's going to try to help make sure that we all manage to stay on the same page. And then if you have questions, he'll be able to field some of those. As I'm painting, I'm not able to watch the chat as closely as I would like. So this way, hopefully we can keep on top of all of that stuff. So thank you for doing that, Joe. I appreciate you volunteering. We're going to do something that's a little bit different this week. And actually for the next few weeks. And what that is I've been wanting to start a new online course. And I've been wanting to basically revamp my free course. I have a course called The Joy of Watercolor, and many of you probably have signed up for that and taken the few lessons that are on there. And it was always intended to be kind of a temporary thing, that Joy of Watercolor course. It's not structured, and it's just it's just a few little lessons to help you with watercolor. But I've wanted to do something that's a little bit more structured, that gives a little bit of a better introduction into who I am and what I do, because that's often where my new students come from. And so I've been working on that, but I haven't been making time to make that course. And so I thought, why don't I take my live online classes that I've been doing every week and use that as my place to build this course. So you guys are going to see the lessons first, and then work and help me as I develop them, I guess. And so I've got a little bit of a lesson plan going. We're going to just start filming those lessons right here, and then later I can develop them into my free online course. And so we're going to just start talking a little bit about the artistic journey. And I know you want to see me paint, and we're going to get to that. But one thing that really hurts is when I see people get discouraged and quit watercolor because they feel like they just can't do it. And that makes me sad, because I know that if you're learning watercolor, it's because there's something deep inside of you that really wants to do it, and it takes courage to start something new. And then it's hard when it doesn't go the way you think, or you don't master it as quickly as you want. And so a lot of times people will give up. They think, oh, I just don't have what it takes. Nothing's turning out. And we'll often hear the word gift. And, as in, she's so gifted. And I wish I had your gift. And what a gifted artist. I wish I could paint, but I'm not artistic. Or she's so talented. Each of these comments, when you hear something like that, or when you say something like that, we're living on the assumption that creativity is something that you're born with, and you either have it or you don't. And if you don't have it, well, don't even bother. And I think that's really a false assumption, and it's a belief that discourages many people from pursuing their dream of creating through art. And it also devalues the hard work of the artists who have spent thousands of hours mastering the medium and refining their art. You know, we work really hard to be good at what we do. And so I like to compare when I'm teaching a class, and I almost always talk about this in my local classes as well, but I like to compare learning to paint with teaching a child to write. When we give a small child a pencil and we teach them to form the letters of their name for the first time, we have no expectations that they're going to create, you know, this beautiful, flawless signature. We're just happy if they can make a few marks on the piece of paper. And but we have full expectations that from those first efforts, they're going to continue to get better. And at some point, we're going to see their name is legible. And further on, they're going to, you know, probably have a passable signature that they can use for the rest of their lives. And we don't, just because those first marks are clumsy and backwards and upside down, we don't say, oh, well, they just don't have what it takes. I guess he's just not going to ever write his name. You know, we have every expectation he's going to be able to do it. And watercolor is exactly the same way. It's a skill, just like learning to write your name, just like learning to ride a bicycle, I guess. You know, we are patient with children as they move through the steps to be able to form their letters and write legibly. And we should be the same with ourselves as we're learning art. So if you have the desire to paint, are you letting that fear of not having what it takes stop you from actually doing it? And because I know that you guys have stepped past that fear, have pushed it into the corner because you're here. And so that's exciting. And I really encourage you, don't be frustrated when you see good art by others. Don't feel like you're, you know, be aware of where you're at as an artist as well. If you're in the toddler stage, don't expect professional results, but trust that they can come. Have that little bit of faith to get you through that journey. Watercolor, again, it's a skill, and like any skill, it can be mastered. And you can learn the techniques, and it happens through practice, through logging those brush miles. And I love thinking of it as, you know, an odometer on your car. You have to put in the time, the distance, go the distance to get that hands-on knowledge, to feel comfortable with the medium. And it takes a lot of faith to believe that you're making progress even when nothing is turning out. But I promise you, every painting session is building your skills and making you a better painter. And I wrote a lot of that down because I didn't want to miss any details. But I really want you guys to feel encouraged in this. And just to have that little bit of faith that gets you through when nothing's turning out. One of my students on my Facebook group just this week had posted she's been working hard on landscapes. They weren't going well. They weren't turning out. She took a break and went back to flowers and created this beautiful sunflower painting, and was so excited by it. And sometimes that happens. Those hours that she spent painting landscapes that weren't turning out, those weren't wasted hours. When she went back to that floral painting and created something in a different subject, something in that time she spent with landscapes was unlocked in order to give her that freedom to paint a flower expressively. And it's just funny how that often happens. Okay, we're going to move over to my painting surface right now and move into the hands-on portion of this lesson today. And we're going to be talking about wet and wet, and just kind of breaking it down and analyzing it a little bit. And I'll be giving you some tips on how to handle your palette as well. For those of you who have been painting for a while, some of this will be very familiar to you, but I think you'll still glean something that you can apply in your painting sessions in your own studio. So I'm just going to switch the camera over. Bear with me as I do that. And there's probably all kinds of rattling and so forth when I get this set up as well. One thing, as you can see on my board here, I wanted to mention it because it is Valentine's Day today, and I got an email from Vita, which is the company that makes my beautiful watercolor scarves. This is a brand new design that I just made available. They have a sale on right now, and if you use the coupon code LOVE20, you get $20 off your order. So I wanted you guys to know about that just in case you've been wanting to pick one of these scarves up. The link is in the description of the video. And they're beautiful. They're a cashmere silk blend that's just gorgeous. Okay, so you guys can hopefully see my work surface now. And I'm just going to use this same sheet of paper that I used last week because I wanted to fill up the other half of it. And what I like to do with my watercolor paper, this is 140 pound, is I love the deckled edge that it comes with, but of course when you break it down, it starts, or make it into smaller pieces, then you don't have the decal on all four sides. So I like to tear my papers so that I have just a little bit of a rough edge to kind of match that deckled edge that it comes with the paper. And I just do that with a metal ruler. Pretty easy to do. And this is an Arches rough watercolor paper. It's 140 pounds, so it's a little bit thinner. And I've been choosing thinner papers lately because I believe that they just, I've talked about mounting my watercolor paintings on a board, and I do have a video on that on my channel here. But when I mount them on board, the thinner paper is just easier to work with when you're adhering it to that panel. So that's why I've been buying the thinner paper, even though I love the thickness of a 300-pound paper. And the other thing I do, of course, once I get my paper to the size that I want, is my palette. I like to prepare it just by misting it with water. And I know you guys, most of you have seen me do this before. And I think that this makes a difference, more of a difference than you would think in your painting. When you mist that paint with water, that water just starts to soak in as the paint is sitting there, and it just gives a little bit of tackiness to the surface so that that first swipe with your brush is going to pick up more pigment. You're going to get a richer color. So if you're having trouble getting color that's rich enough when you're painting, you know, try that misting technique. Give that water a chance to set in. I actually have a friend who will spend 30 minutes just with a damp brush, and she will just massage the paint so that she even has even more of a puddle in her palette. And I don't bother with that kind of thing, but you know, that extra little bit of time just does help to get that paint just a little bit tackier. Okay, the wet in wet technique, you guys, everyone should know, and I get in trouble for calling you all guys. I'm using it in the most generic way possible. I mean everyone. And wet and wet just means you're painting with wet paint on wet paper. And you know that already. Some artists will actually wet their plastic board down and then slap their wet paper on that board, and the moisture kind of suctions the paper in place, and you get a really long time of everything staying wet and very absorbent. And I'm just going to water down wet the half of the paper, and I like it to be quite moist, because that first brush stroke across the paper, that water is going to soak in pretty fast. And so it's nice to do just a little bit of extra water so there's just a slight film of water across your paper. And we know that when we're painting wet and wet, we're going to get a very soft effect. And I'm going to grab some new paint, and I've put them in my temporary palette, which a potter friend made for me. I'm going to use the Payne's Blue Gray, which I've just added this afternoon, and just brush that across in place. And what I like to do with painting wet and wet is keep a very light touch. I think often, I'm going to grab some more color here, when what I see students do is they'll dot in those initial colors moist on the paper, and then they'll take their brush and start stirring them around. And this is going to, of course, mix your colors so that they mix more smoothly. But you're going to sacrifice in terms of how the colors organically flow on the paper. And I love letting watercolor do some of the work by letting gravity and just the properties of water work in my favor. I can tilt my paper so that things flow and let them mix on their own. This is just, I think, a little quinacridone lilac and probably a little bit of palette dirt. and I can spatter it, and then of course it falls in an organic way. But as it starts to flow down the paper, it's going to start mixing on its own. When I'm stirring with my brush, I start to lose freshness. And not only that, but I'm also disturbing the paper fibers, because I believe that when the paper is wet like this, the fibers are going to be a little more fragile as well, and more likely to be, your brush could push them out of their natural grain maybe. And this is all kind of speculation. I'm not a paper scientist, but it just makes sense to me that not only am I disturbing the flow of the paint, but I'm going to be affecting the nap or the grain of the paper as well. I'm going to grab some of this raw, I think it's gold ochre. And I didn't wet my palette down on this pottery palette here. And do you see the gold ochre there? Not really, because of course my first swipe with the brush, the paint hadn't been prepared. So it's not going to want to lift, and I have to spend a little more time kind of stroking it to get my brush loaded up. And that means things are drying over here while I'm messing over on my palette. So that's another reason why you want to just spend a little time preparing your palette before you start painting. And I'm going to just touch in that gold ochre. And again, the light touch gives me that freshness that I don't want to lose. I am going to go, Joe's fielding your questions, and I'm sure he's doing a wonderful job, but I am going to go over your questions toward the end of the lesson as well, and take a look at them. Now, the deal with painting wet and wet is this is not the time to be thinking about the details. And we do this thing, I call it painting the honeybee. When I'm driving somewhere, on my way to my sister's house, for example, there's this part where you come up over the hill, and if the atmosphere is just right, you can see the Rocky Mountains, just very far off in the distance. And so they're very faint. They're just a pale gray, blue-gray color, and you don't see very many details at all. It would be very foolish of me, if I wanted to paint that scene, to start trying to paint the trees or the honeybee on the flower on the mountain. We don't paint the details we can't see. We wait, and if I were to want to paint details in my scene, I don't do it as my first thing I do. And we do this thing when we're painting that we want to rush right into details. Wet and wet painting is 90% of the time a very beginning stage of your painting. You're not doing details, you're not creating strong contrasts and strong shapes. Everything needs to stay soft and suggested. And as soon as we start trying to paint that honeybee, that detail that it's not time for, and we maybe can't even see coming out of our painting yet, we're going to start to lose focus, we're going to lose perspective. So wet and wet painting, we do this for the first layer of our painting. We're establishing major shapes, we're maybe planning colors and starting to suggest values, but we really don't want to go any deeper than that. Now, another thing you can do with wet and wet painting, and this is going to be our little Valentine's treat, I think, is I'm going to grab a fresh sheet of paper for it. And this is the Arches cold press, and you can see it's quite a bit smoother, also because I'm using the back side, and the two sides are slightly different. One is a little bit smoother. But I'm just going to use my wet and wet this time to just paint a simple shape. And of course it's Valentine, so it's going to be a heart shape. And I'm just going to paint that with water. And I bet my camera is going to have a hard time seeing it. So you might have not a lot of focus happening here initially. And then I'm maybe going to paint a few little shapes within that shape. We'll do some little swirly curls. And I'm just painting with my water. And this is just a fun technique. It's a fun exercise to do. And it works really well if you're painting, maybe you're painting a leaf and you want a wet and wet look, but you don't want it to, it doesn't have to be your background. So I've just started painting some shapes here. Now I'm going to grab a color, and this is quinacridone coral, and I don't think it's going to move very much. It doesn't have a whoosh effect, just the properties of the paint aren't super whooshy. High dispersing is usually the term I use, not whooshy. And so it's not moving much, but I'm dotting it into place. And then I can pick another color, and I don't have my quinacridone magenta with me today. It's in my other palette. So I'm going to grab, I believe this is Bordeaux by Daniel Smith, and that's got a little bit more movement. So I can dot that in and let it flow. And then let's add something interesting, something that does have movement, and I think I'll use my Nickel Azo yellow because that has great flow. And there we go. There we get that magic that we love. And Nickel Azo yellow doesn't like, I mean, with purple it's a complementary color, so Nickel Azo yellow and purple are going to make a neutral. But if you use that really light touch that I talked about, you don't have to worry about losing the freshness. In fact, the colors might just stay separate from each other enough to maintain their individuality while still creating that beautiful dynamic look. And now I'm going to continue to add little shapes, and I could switch brushes. I brought my Princeton or my Escoda Versatile number 2. This is a number 10. You can see the difference. They're quite a bit different. And I haven't looked at the screen in a while, so I'm going to just check in as well, see how things are going. Good, I don't see any panicked. Things aren't working and the technical stuff is not working. Oh, and now I just went with paint, so we're going to use a damp brush again and continue on. And I could go inside of my shapes with this smaller brush and create beautiful, almost a lacy effect. And now that there is some paint flowing, I'm going to have a different, I'm going to have some color already bleeding onto this side, but that's okay. We're going to continue to work with it. And I'm just doing simple curving lines. It doesn't have to be complicated. I'm kind of tempted to just splash a little bit too, just to take my brush and dot a little bit of color on at random, but I think I'll save that till the end. And you can see the smaller brush is creating a thinner line, which means now I have like a lack of consistency across the painting. But I might just give this to my husband as his Valentine's card. And he's not like a super, he's not a real critic when it comes to my art. He's pretty supportive. So if it doesn't look completely flawless, he'll be okay with that. That's cobalt teal. Isn't that gorgeous? And this kind of thing is a little bit mesmerizing. It's not really maybe what I would do to, well, I don't know. This is the kind of thing that maybe you'd use as an exercise to teach you a little bit about your colors. We're learning which colors have great flow and which ones not so much. Like that quinacridone coral is just not very not very active in a wash. And then I think I would probably want to tidy up the shape of my heart. It's not completely gorgeous. I'm a little bit, I should have drawn it with pencil first. But I could just take and adjust the shape. That's some ultramarine blue. At the very least, this will be my funny Valentine, if it's not my flawless Valentine. And the thing with watercolors, you can always refine it. With painting loosely like this, I think we need more of that gold up here. With painting loosely like this, you can add, as you paint more on it, you get to start tightening up and adding stronger details. But I mean, this is just a fun little exercise for Valentine's Day, but what I would use wet and wet for, if I'm not doing a background where it's filling the whole page or doing the sky or filling a large area, is you might just use that wet and wet to paint simple shapes. And this one's actually turned into quite a complex shape. We've taken a simple shape and we've added We've painted wet and wet, but we've painted wet and wet on little paths throughout the shape. And you can do that. You can, paint wet and wet on maybe a leaf if you're painting flowers. And a lot of times you might want to be controlled and realistic in the flowers themselves. But when it comes to adding the details, you don't have to be working in all these layers of glazes. Maybe you're just going to take that single shape, your leaf, and dot in some color. Put in that base color of green or whatever you see, and then add some additional colors. Dot in a little bit of yellow where the sun is hitting it. Oh, that's just beautiful. And maybe there's a shadow area on the side. Oh, I need a little more paint on my brush. And there's actually all my water in the wet and wet part is flowing to this edge. Sometimes when you have a little too much of a puddle, you want to just suck it up with that thirsty brush. And then get that shadow in like we wanted. Maybe use a little bit of blue on this side to create that shadow. And you can always tilt it, and that's going to change my heart up there too. But and yeah, I've just lost a large quantity of water out the side, and that's okay. Now it's a bleeding heart. But you get that initial wet and wet effect, and it's a loose effect, but it's in a small area so that you have that. I know not everyone is comfortable with doing a lot of splashy, loose and flowing stuff. I'll show you this one I have over here. This is very vibrant and very loose at this stage, and I'm going to be adding details as they sort of come out to me. I've been studying this little painting for a while, but even if you're not comfortable with that kind of looseness, you can use loose and wet techniques to create that look of looseness and softness in your painting without having to give up control over your whole painting. You can have the control and the detail and have that looseness too. And that's why I wanted to show you guys two ways of using wet and wet painting to create two different effects. But again, this is not the time where we're putting in a lot of details. I get to tweak my shape a little bit. Look at how I've refined, just given that leaf a little bit more of an interesting shape. But I've kept that softness, and as this dries, then I can go in if I want to paint the veins of that leaf and give it a little bit more dimension. But underneath, you're going to have this beautiful fluidity that gives you that loose look with a little bit more control. Okay, gonna take a breath and take a look at the chat here. I appreciate Joe taking the time to keep tabs on everything, and I just want to see if there's anything I can answer directly. I want to also show you this early wet and wet background that I started. This could become anything, and that's one thing I love about painting wet and wet is just this open to suggestion effect that I get. Maybe this will become a sky, and maybe it could be a whole landscape. I could really, or maybe you see an animal there. There's a little drop of water that fell as the wash was drying that's given me this little blotchy shape. Maybe that's an eye and I have a fish, or, it could be anything. And I love that about painting wet and wet. And that's the goal of painting wet and wet, is keeping things loose. Saving your detail and your strong contrasts and your sharp edges for later in the painting. Great questions. Let's see here. Jill, you've asked a pretty recent question. Do you usually start a painting with an idea in mind, or just a set of colors, or neither or both? I think both most of the time, Jill. I love working with what is happening, reacting to what's happening on my paper. And so frequently in the studio, I'll start with a warm-up where I'm doing something that's very loose and very fresh. and nothing, and not an actual object. I might think I'm going to choose floral type colors, but that's as far as I'll go with it. And one thing I really like to do is once I've done a wash like this, I turn it around and I look at it from different directions to see what comes out, because sometimes I'm painting and I'm thinking of a flower, but then when I pause and stop and turn it, I might see something completely different that just gets my my brain kind of all fired up and gives me all kinds of creative ideas. And I'm always looking for something to excite me when I'm painting in the studio. And I use different tricks like to get me excited and to motivate me to push my boundaries and experiment. And that means being willing to throw out the original idea to tackle something new. The watercolors I use today are all from Daniel Smith. And I do have a link in the description for all my supplies, my palette, my brushes, my paper, and so forth. Not my water containers, because that's just because I eat yogurt once in a while, and that's where they all come from. I do also like watercolors by Core. I've been using some Sennelier. I try different brands whenever I can. Let's see, what else? Yeah, we've had questions about paper. One reason I've been using rough paper lately is because it really does pretty things when you're painting loosely. I think the more control you want in your painting, the less water, then the more like you're going to want to move towards cold press and hot press. Hot press paper is really for when you're using very little water at all. And if you're trying to do a loose and fluid wash on hot press paper, it's not going to do the things that you want, that you see mine doing on the more textured papers. And I noticed that I had a few sheets of rough paper, and when I would paint on it, I would just have so much fun. And so I realized that something in my style really responds well to the rougher paper. And so I've been gravitating more and more to using rough instead of cold press, although I like cold press does pretty well, as pretty good for me as well. Watercolor lessons, you were asking about paper. It really depends on the style of painting you're planning for your project, and might be worthwhile to try both. If you're going for a high degree of detail and not a lot of water, do go for the hot press or cold press. And cold press is kind of the middle of the road. If you're not sure what to use, then that's a good choice because it kind of does both. I want to encourage you as well to check out the courses I've mentioned in my description. These video classes are not meant to be a replacement for the online courses that I teach, which are much more structured and have the student gallery where I can also critique and guide your work. So I want to encourage you to check that out. And my Facebook group. I just want to encourage you as well. Anybody can join my Facebook group, Angela Fehr Watercolor Workshop. I'm going to switch the camera back over now. Just give me a second. And I'm still trying to check out your comments here. I see you guys are talking about different painting mediums, which I think is cool. I've never really done much for oil painting. My grandma was an oil painter, and so I think I painted once with her when I was about 12. And I've never really touched it since. I love watercolor for its portability, for its beauty, its unique qualities. Gouache, which is the opaque version of watercolor. It's a watercolor paint, but it's not transparent. I have a few tubes of that as well. And there's a guy on Instagram, I think it's Squatch Gouache, who does amazing stuff. And every time I see his paintings, it makes me want to give gouache a try. I'm realizing that the more opaque watercolors have their place in painting as well. And I think it's always interesting if you're feeling discouraged in your watercolor journey, and we talked about this earlier, but I think it's one way to kind of stay encouraged is to see how you've changed over the years. or months if you haven't been painting long. And colors I didn't know how to use years ago, I absolutely love now. I used to work with purely transparent colors, and now I'm seeing the advantage of some that aren't quite as transparent. So as you see yourself change in what you like, maybe you become more discerning, but you also are trying new techniques, and you can be excited about that and very encouraged. I appreciate you guys joining me today. I want to thank Joe again for being so gracious as to spend his time here moderating. And I hope you guys found that helpful. I love seeing the chat so busy, and I feel a little bit left out that I don't get to just spend all my time visiting with you guys over there. But I do hope you found the lesson useful. We're going to talk, again, these principles of watercolor painting. I know you guys often come hoping to see me paint a full scene, but what I want and my objective for you is to learn the tools for good decision making in painting. And so that means taking the puzzle pieces and examining them a little bit. And so just because I'm not painting a full scene doesn't mean the information isn't useful. I want you guys to be able to think about the techniques you're using, when and why you want to use them, so that you can apply them and paint more confidently. So I hope that this lesson has helped you to do that. Do subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Check out the information in the description below the video, because I always put lots of helpful stuff there. And just thanks again for joining me. Have a great day. And I really appreciate you checking in. I will take a look at the comments and try to answer just any last few questions after I've logged off of the video here. And yeah, have a great rest of the week. I hope you find time to paint, and just embrace the things that you love about watercolor. Don't feel guilty about the stuff that you haven't quite figured out yet, but just have fun with it.